The two brothers wouldn't stop laughing. They stood in the center of Iron Peak Combat Gym, matching black belts cinched at their waists, phones raised and recording, pointing at the woman who had just walked through the door in hospital scrubs with dried coffee on her sleeve and exhaustion written across every line of her face. "Look at this," one of them said, loud enough for the whole gym to hear. Did the hospital lose a patient, or did the patient lose her way? The crowd laughed. The woman didn't. She set her bag down, looked at them once, and said nothing. What they didn't know, what nobody in that gym knew, was that the quiet nurse standing in front of their cameras had once been cleared for operations most soldiers never hear about, and she remembered everything. If this story already has you hooked, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and follow along until the very end. Drop a like and leave a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. The shift ended at 6:47 in the morning. Mara Solis knew this because she checked the clock on the wall of Trauma Bay 3 the exact second. The attending physician released her, and she stood there for a moment with her gloves still on, staring at the second hand like it owed her something. 11 hours. 2 cardiac events, 1 pediatric overdose, a multi-vehicle crash that had brought in 4 patients inside of 20 minutes, and a man who had come in claiming chest pain but turned out to have a broken rib from a fall he didn't want to explain to anyone. She had managed all of it without raising her voice, without losing a patient, and without eating anything since a granola bar she'd found crushed at the bottom of her locker at 8 the previous evening. Hargrove Regional Medical Center was not a glamorous place to work. It was a mid-sized hospital in the outer edge of Delmore, a city that sat between 2 larger cities and got the overflow from both. The uninsured, the undertreated, the people who drove 40 minutes because the downtown ERs were full. Mara had been a trauma nurse here for 3 years, and before that she'd spent 2 years at a smaller clinic in a rural county where the nearest backup was a helicopter and a prayer. She didn't romanticize any of it. She showed up, she did the work, she went home. Except home, on mornings like this, felt too quiet to go back to just yet. She changed in the locker room, peeling off her scrubs and pulling on black training tights and a worn gray long sleeve she'd had since her mid-20s. She splashed water on her face, looked at herself in the mirror for exactly 2 seconds, enough to confirm she was still standing, and then grabbed her gym bag and walked out. Iron Peak Combat Gym was a 20-minute drive from the hospital. Mara had discovered it 8 months ago when she'd been looking for somewhere to train that wasn't a commercial fitness chain full of mirrors and pop music. Iron Peak was the opposite. It occupied the ground floor of a converted warehouse near the freight district, with exposed brick walls, heavy bags hanging from the ceiling on industrial chains, and a main mat area that smelled like sweat and rubber, and something indefinably serious. The owner, a retired wrestler named Donahue, ran it with a loose but genuine ethic. He cared about technique, he cared about safety, and he absolutely did not care about how many followers you had online, or so Mara had believed. She pushed through the front door at 7:20, nodding at the young woman behind the check-in desk who was used to seeing her at odd hours. The gym was already busy for early morning. It always was when the Vero brothers had a session scheduled. She could feel the shift in energy before she even saw them. A cluster of phones raised near the far training station, murmuring, the particular kind of attention that meant someone was performing. Caden and Cole Varo were identical twins, 26 years old, and the most widely recognized faces in Delmore's fitness community. They had both earned black belts in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Muay Thai. They competed on the regional circuit, and they ran a joint social media channel called Vero Force that had accumulated just under 2 million followers across platforms. Their content was a mix of legitimate training footage, motivational clips, and increasingly, over the past year, videos that could most accurately be described as ambushes. They would identify someone in the gym who looked out of place, approach them on camera, push them into an uncomfortable situation, and film whatever happened next. They edited it to make themselves look like gatekeepers, and the other person look like either a fool or a coward. The gym community had started to notice. Some people had stopped coming. Others stayed because they genuinely enjoyed the facility and didn't want to surrender it. Mara had made peace with the Veros existing in the same space she did by simply ignoring them, which was easier than it sounded because they had, so far, ignored her back. She walked to the far side of the mat area, dropped her bag near the wall, and started her warm-up. Mobility work first, rolling her shoulders, working through her hips, shaking out the tension that 11 hours of clinical work had packed into her spine. She was 2 minutes into it when she heard the voice. "Hey, excuse me." She kept moving. "Hey, nurse." She stopped, looked over her shoulder. Caden Vero, or Cole, she could never tell from a distance, was standing about 8 feet away with his phone raised and his brother just behind him, also filming. A small cluster of early morning gym members had already formed around them, the way crowds always form around something that smells like it might become a scene. "You're in our station," the one with the phone said. Mara looked at the station. It was a floor mat area with 2 kettlebells set to one side and a single pull-up rig overhead. There was nobody using it. She had started her warm-up in the open space adjacent to it, not on it. "I'm not in your station," she said. "I haven't touched anything. We have this reserved. The board by the door shows this station open until 8. A pause. He hadn't expected that. She had clearly read the scheduling board on her way in, which was something most people didn't bother to do. He glanced at his brother, and something passed between them. A recalibration. "You're what, a nurse?" He nodded at her bag, which had a Hargrove Regional lanyard hanging from the zipper. "Long shift?" "Yes." "You look it." He grinned at the phone. "No offense." "Some taken," she said, and turned back to her warm-up. The crowd made a small sound. Not quite a laugh, not quite a reaction, just the ambient noise of people watching to see what would happen next. She heard the brothers murmuring to each other, heard the word boring from one of them, and then the footsteps moved away. She exhaled slowly and continued. That should have been the end of it. She spent 40 minutes working through a session she'd designed herself. Body weight circuits mixed with controlled bag work. Nothing that required a partner, nothing that required equipment she'd need to claim or schedule. She kept her headphones in one ear and her attention on the space around her out of habit, the way she always did in unfamiliar environments, the way she'd been trained to do in environments far less safe than a gym in Delmore. She was toweling off her hands when Cole Vero appeared beside her. Not Caden this time. Cole was the one she'd read about in a brief interview on a local sports blog. The slightly quieter twin, the more technically precise fighter, the one who planned while his brother performed. He wasn't holding his phone. That, somehow, made her more alert than when the camera was present. "You've been coming here a while," he said. It wasn't a question. 8 months? "I've seen you. You train weird." She glanced at him. "Weird how?" "Like you're not actually working out, like you're running a checklist." He studied her with the flat curiosity of someone who spent a lot of time assessing bodies in motion. "What's your background?" She pulled her water bottle from her bag. "Nursing." "Before that?" She took a drink. "Long time before that." He didn't push it, which surprised her. He just nodded, slow and thoughtful, and walked away. She watched him go and felt the particular unease of someone who had just been accurately observed and had responded by being vague, which meant the observation would continue. She should have left earlier. She knew that in retrospect. Instead, she stayed for another 15 minutes, finishing her cool down. And that was when Caden came back with 3 friends and his phone live streaming to what she would later learn was an audience of approximately 4,000 concurrent viewers. "All right, we're back," he said to the camera, positioning himself so that Mara was visible in the background. "And we've got something special for you guys this morning. Our resident nurse here has been ghosting us all session, and I think it's time we find out if she's got anything actually in the tank, or if she's just here to, I don't know, take blood pressure readings." The friends laughed. A few other gym members stopped what they were doing. Mara kept her eyes on her bag. "Hey," Caden said, louder. "You. I'm talking to you." She zipped her bag closed. "I know." "You want to get on the mat? Quick round, nothing serious." "No." "Why not?" She straightened, looked at him directly. "Because I'm done with my session, I'm tired, and I have no interest in performing for your camera." "Performing?" He turned to his audience with an expression of theatrical bewilderment. "I just asked if she wanted to spar. Relax." He looked back at her. "You scared?" "I'm tired," she repeated. "There's a difference." "Sure there is." He took a step closer, still filming, and lowered his voice just enough that it felt intimate on camera without being quiet enough to not be heard. "You've been coming here for 8 months. I've watched you train. You do all this solo stuff, never partner up. never actually test yourself. That's fine for a hobby. But you're in a combat gym. You start looking like you don't belong. People start to wonder. Something shifted in Mara's expression. Not much, just enough that Cole, watching from 10 feet away, noticed it. I belong here as much as anyone, she said. Prove it. I don't prove things to cameras. He grinned. That's what people say when they can't. She picked up her bag. She was not going to do this. She had made a decision a long time ago about what she would and would not use her training for, and a live-stream clout grab at 7 in the morning in a Freight District gym did not qualify. She walked toward the exit with the particular calm of someone who had learned to manage physiological stress responses in conditions that would make this moment look like a pleasant stroll. She was at the door when she heard the crash. She turned. Her medical bag, the secondary bag she always brought to the gym, the one with her personal first aid kit and a few supplies out of professional habit, had been kicked off the bench where she'd left it. It was on the floor, contents partially spilled. Caden was standing next to where it had been, phone still raised, expression carefully neutral. "Oh, sorry," he said. "Accident." It wasn't an accident. The angle of the kick, the fact that the bag had been positioned against the wall and would have required deliberate contact to reach. None of it was accidental. She looked at him, then at the bag, then at the 4,000 people watching through his phone screen. She crouched down and began gathering her supplies, methodically, without hurry. Gauze pads, a compression wrap, a small flashlight, a pair of trauma shears. She placed each item back in the bag with the same care she used when restocking a crash cart, which was to say, completely and in the correct order. The crowd was very quiet. "You know what's interesting," she said, not looking up, "is that the people who do things like this always think the other person is going to react the way they need them to. Get angry, cry, run, whatever makes the story work." She zipped the bag closed and stood. "I'm not going to do any of those things." She left. The video was up by 9 a.m. Mara was home by then, showered, eating toast with peanut butter, sitting at her kitchen table with her phone face down because she already knew, in the way that people who have spent time in situations of genuine danger develop a sense for when something is coming. She flipped the phone over and searched her name. It took about 40 seconds to find it. The thumbnail was her, mid-crouch, picking up supplies off the floor, while Caden Vero stood above her with his arms crossed. The title read, "Nurse Gets Exposed at Combat Gym." She had nothing. She watched 47 seconds of it. That was enough to understand the edit. They had cut out everything she'd said, shortened the timeline to make it look like she'd immediately backed down, and added a graphic overlay with the word "coward" in block letters. The comment section was what she would have expected. She closed the app. She sat with her toast and her coffee and the particular quiet of an apartment that belonged to someone who had chosen to live alone. And she thought about the 47 seconds she'd just watched. And she thought about something further back. A different room, a different kind of pressure. A debrief where someone across a table had told her that the hardest discipline wasn't in the field. It was in knowing when the field wasn't the right place to use what you knew. She had believed that for 6 years. She still believed it. She finished her toast. She slept for 6 hours. And when she woke up, there were 11 missed calls. 3 were from the hospital, a scheduling question, not an emergency. She could handle it later. 2 were from a number she didn't recognize. 6 were from a number she did. Donnie Okafor had been in the same unit as Mara for 2 years during a period neither of them talked about in detail at social gatherings. She was now a physical therapist in Portland, married, had a dog, coached a women's self-defense workshop on weekends. She was also the only person from that part of Mara's life who called regularly enough to be saved in her contacts. Mara called her back. "I saw it," Danny said before Mara could speak. "How?" "It has 400,000 views, Mara. One of my workshop girls sent it to me asking if I knew the nurse in the video because she goes to that gym." A pause. "You okay?" "I'm fine. I'm annoyed." "You should be more than annoyed. It's a gym video. It's you on a 400,000 view video picking your stuff up off the floor while some guy with a man bun stands over you looking smug." Danny's voice was controlled, but not entirely. "That's not a gym video. That's a public humiliation clip packaged as entertainment." "I know what it is." "Then why did you walk away?" Mara was quiet for a moment. Outside her window, the late afternoon light was doing something nice to the street below. She watched a woman walk a large, elderly dog that moved with the ponderous dignity of something that had seen everything. "Because I wasn't going to fight on his terms," she said. "His whole setup was designed to make me either perform for his camera or be humiliated by refusing. Walking away was the only option that wasn't on his menu. I understand the logic. But he still got the clip he wanted." Danny's voice went quieter. "And now 400,000 people think you're afraid of him, and that number is going to keep going up." Mara didn't answer right away. "You spent 4 years learning to respond to situations where the environment was designed against you," Danny said. "You got good at it, really good. A beat. These guys are bullies who picked you because they thought you were soft. And maybe the right move isn't to fight them in their gym on their terms, but there might be a different kind of right move that you're not looking at." "What does that mean?" "It means I'm sending you a link. There's an event at Iron Peak next month. A charity combat tournament, open registration, legitimate bracket, independent officials, recorded matches uploaded to the gym's official channel, not their private one. Real rules, real stakes." Another pause. "Your name would fit on that registration form." Mara looked at the ceiling for a long moment. "I left that version of myself behind," she said. "You left the context behind," Danny corrected her. "You didn't leave yourself behind. There's a difference." She let that sit. "I'm not telling you to hurt anybody. I'm telling you that sometimes the only way to tell the truth is to stand in a place where the truth can be seen." After they hung up, Mara sat in her kitchen for 20 minutes without turning on any lights, watching the street below as the afternoon turned into evening. She thought about the 47 seconds of video. She thought about 400,000 strangers who now had a fixed image of who she was, formed in the time it took to scroll past a thumbnail. She thought about Caden Vero's carefully neutral expression as she'd crouched on the floor picking up her things, and the way Cole Varro had watched from 10 feet away with something that was hard to read. Not pride in his brother, not quite, but not discomfort either. She thought about a training instructor from a long time ago who had a saying she'd written off as military speak at the time and had gradually come to understand differently. The restraint is the skill, but the skill still has to exist. She picked up her phone. She looked at the link Danny had sent. She didn't register that night, but she didn't delete the link. The next 4 days were ordinary in the way that she appreciated and that other people sometimes found hard to understand. Long shifts. 2 difficult patients, a conversation with a resident who was burning out faster than she should have been and needed someone to say, clearly and without softening it, that the feeling she was describing was real and needed to be addressed before it became a problem she couldn't manage. Mara had that conversation, and she had it well, because she had practiced with the particular challenge of delivering accurate information to someone who wasn't ready to receive it. She didn't go back to Iron Peak. She ran instead, in the early morning before her shifts, through the freight district in the park beside the river. She liked running for the same reason she'd always liked it. It required nothing except continuing. No technique to manage, no partner to adjust to, no equipment that could fail at the wrong moment. Just the decision to keep going, repeated for however long it needed to be. She was running on the 4th morning when she passed a display window for a sporting goods store that had a screen in it cycling through promotional videos. And one of the videos was a clip from the Iron Peak charity tournament announcement. She stopped, watched it through the glass. The clip was 60 seconds, overhead footage of the gym's mat area, a highlight reel of previous amateur matches, text explaining the registration details, and the cause being supported, which was a local program providing free after-school martial arts instruction for kids in lower-income neighborhoods. She stood on the sidewalk for maybe 2 minutes. A man with a coffee walked around her, slightly annoyed. She didn't notice. That evening, she opened Danny's link. The registration form was straightforward. Name, contact, training background, preferred weight class, signature on a liability waiver. She filled it out with the same attention she brought to clinical documentation, accurately, completely, without embellishment. In the field marked training background, she wrote, "General conditioning and combative training," which was accurate in the same way that describing the Pacific Ocean as a large body of water was accurate. She submitted the form at 9:43 p.m. on a Tuesday. The confirmation email from Iron Peak arrived the next morning. So did something else. She was getting ready for a shift when her phone buzzed with a notification from a local news aggregator app. She kept installed mostly for hospital-adjacent updates. The headline was, Varo Force Viral Video Tops 1.2 million views. Brothers plan exclusive Iron Peak tournament coverage. She read the article in the parking lot of the hospital, sitting in her car with the engine off. The piece was largely promotional, a puff profile of the twins for a local entertainment blog, with quotes from Caden about how they plan to bring their full production team to the Iron Peak charity tournament and turn it into the biggest combat sports event Delmore has seen this year. There was a photo of the two of them posing in the gym, arms crossed, matching expressions of confident authority. Near the bottom of the article, Caden was quoted as saying, "We want to make this real. We want the competition to mean something. That means we need to be there, documenting it, showing people what real combat sports looks like, not some hobby class sparring. We're open to anyone who thinks they've got something, especially the ones who ran last time." She read that last sentence twice. She put her phone in her pocket and went inside to start her shift. It was a brutal one. 3 traumas before noon, a respiratory case in the afternoon that required every person in the bay working in tight coordination for nearly 40 minutes, and an early evening admission of a teenage boy who'd been in a fight and was trying very hard not to cry in front of the nurse assessing him. She cleaned his cuts, talked to him in the particular tone she used for patients who needed to feel like the room was safe, and did not say anything about the irony of the day she was having. She was charting at a workstation near the end of her shift when her colleague Petra appeared at her elbow. Petra Vasquez, 5 years a trauma nurse, constitutionally incapable of keeping things she found interesting to herself. "You know that video?" Petra said. "Which video?" "The one of you, at the gym." Petra's voice was studiedly casual. "The one that's at, I just looked, 1.4 million. Mara continued charting. "I'm aware of it." "People here have been watching it." Petra paused. "The charge nurse showed it to the department head during lunch." Mara stopped typing. "Not in a bad way," Petra said quickly. Dr. Ellison apparently laughed and said something about how you're the most composed person she's ever seen, which she meant as a compliment, except maybe it came out a little sideways. Another pause. "But then Tomas in radiology recognized the guy from the video. The twin, the one who kicked your bag, because apparently his girlfriend follows them. And Tomas said something to someone, and now there are people in this building who think you should have done something. Done something like what? Like fought back, or said something, or..." Petra stopped. "I'm just telling you what's out there." "I appreciate that. Are you okay?" Mara saved her chart and looked at Petra directly. Petra was a good nurse and a decent person, and she was asking out of genuine concern, not prurience. "I'm fine," Mara said. "I made a choice I'm comfortable with. Other people's discomfort with that choice is their problem to manage." Petra nodded slowly. "Okay, then, but if you ever were to do something, I'd watch the hell out of that." She went back to Iron Peak on a Thursday. Not for a regular session. She'd been training at home and on runs. She went because the tournament bracket had been posted online, and she wanted to see it in person, on the board by the entrance where Donahue always posted official event information. She'd already seen it online, but there was something about seeing it printed and pinned that she needed. She pushed through the door at 6 in the evening. The gym was at its busiest. She made her way to the board near the entrance, found the tournament bracket, and stood reading it. Her name was there. Mara Solis. Weight class 135. Experience division. She was bracketed against a woman she didn't know in the first round. She heard the silence before she understood why. The gym had gone a few degrees quieter in the way that spaces do when something shifts in the social atmosphere. Not suddenly, just a gradual lowering of volume as attention redirected. She turned around. Caden and Cole Vero were standing about 15 feet away. They'd been mid-conversation with 2 other people when something, probably one of those people, had pointed toward the bracket board, and then toward her. Caden looked at the board, looked at her. His expression cycled through something too fast to catch completely. Surprise, then recalibration, then the performance taking over. "Well," he said, loud enough to carry, "she did it." Cole said nothing. He was looking at Mara with that same flat assessment she'd seen the first time, the one that had felt like being measured without consent. "You registered," Caden said. He was grinning now, and the grin was almost convincing. Almost. "Good for you. Seriously, that's good." He glanced at his brother, then back at her. "We'll see you out there then." "You will," she said. She didn't say anything else. She turned back to the board, looked at the bracket for another 5 seconds, as if she were still reading it, then picked up her bag and walked out. Behind her, she heard Caden say something to his brother in a lower voice, something with a laugh in it. And she heard Cole respond. Not a laugh, not agreement. She couldn't make out the words. But the tone was different, something she filed away. The tournament was in 22 days. She had work to do. She got in her car and sat for a moment in the parking lot, and for the first time since this whole thing had started, she let herself think clearly about what she was actually doing and what it was going to cost. She was not afraid of Caden Varro. That was not what the feeling was. The feeling was more like the one she'd had in certain tactical situations, a held breath before a door opened, not because of what she didn't know, but because of everything she did. She knew what she was capable of. She knew what it meant to use that capability deliberately, in public, on camera, against a civilian who thought he was competing in a sport. She also knew that the discipline she'd built wasn't about fighting. It was about control. And control, properly understood, was the only way this went right. She started the car. 22 days. She drove home through the freight district as the lights were coming on above the river, and she didn't think about the video or the comment section or the bracket or the Varro brothers' carefully managed faces. She thought about the first time she'd been in a situation that was genuinely and specifically designed to break her, not physically, but psychologically. She thought about what she'd learned there, in a room a long way from Delmore, from an instructor who was difficult to impress and had once, at the end of a very long day, told her something she'd kept. You don't have to announce yourself. The situation will do that for you, when it's ready. She drove. The city moved past her windows. Somewhere in a gym in the freight district, two brothers were already talking about this, shaping it, framing it, preparing the narrative in advance. And somewhere in the parking lot of a hospital on the other side of town, a woman who had once been very good at making sure the narrative never got ahead of the facts sat very still in her car, staring at her own hands on the wheel. She had 22 days. It was enough. She drove home through the freight district as the lights were coming on above the river, and she didn't think about the video or the comment section or the bracket or the Varro brothers' carefully managed faces. The 22 days didn't feel abstract anymore. They felt like a countdown she could hear. She set her alarm for 5 the next morning and slept better than she had in a week. Training alone had always suited her, not because she preferred isolation. She'd spent enough time in close quarters with other people under pressure to know she could function there, but because solo training was honest in a way that partner work sometimes wasn't. A partner could adjust for you, slow their reaction time by a fraction, let you believe you were faster or sharper than you were. A heavy bag, a resistance band, a timer running on her phone. Those things didn't have opinions about her performance. They just responded to what she actually did. For the first week, she kept it quiet. Morning runs, an hour of bodyweight work in her apartment, technique review in the evenings using the space she'd cleared in her living room by pushing the couch against the wall. She wasn't rebuilding anything from scratch. That was one of the things nobody who hadn't trained that way understood. The body remembered. 6 years of clinical work had softened the edge of her conditioning, but the architecture underneath was still there. The way a foundation stays solid, even when the house above it has been renovated into something quieter. What she was doing was reminding herself of the difference between training to stay fit and training with a purpose. By the end of the first week, the difference was obvious. She was sharper after 40 minutes of purposeful work than she'd been after 90 minutes of her usual gym routine. Her reaction time was already tightening. She could feel it in the way her hands moved when she worked the combinations she'd been drilling. Not the complex sequences, the fundamentals, the same movements she'd practiced 10,000 times until they stopped being decisions and became reflexes. She was on the mat, the living room mat, the piece of foam she'd ordered 2 days after registering, working through a sequence for the 4th time in a session when her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She let it go, finished the sequence, then checked it. Danny had sent a link with a single line of text above it. You should know about this. The link went to a video posted to Varro Force approximately 6 hours earlier. The thumbnail showed a still from the tournament bracket, with Mara's name circled in red. The title read, "She finally showed up, and we're ready." She watched it with her arms folded, standing in her living room in sweaty training clothes. And she watched the whole thing this time, not 47 seconds. It was 11 minutes long. The first 4 were a recap of the original video, the gym confrontation, her picking up her medical bag, walking out. The next 3 were Caden talking to camera in a practiced confessional style, explaining how he'd been surprised but honestly kind of impressed that she'd registered, followed by a walkthrough of their training plan for the tournament. The final 4 minutes were a series of slow-motion clips of both brothers sparring, fluid, technically sound, genuinely impressive. Set to music designed to make the viewer feel like they were watching something inevitable. It ended with Caden looking directly into the lens. We want to be clear. We've got nothing against her personally. She seems like a nice person. She just came into our space, acted like she belonged, and then couldn't back it up. And now she's going to try again in an official setting, which, respect, honestly. But respect doesn't change what happens on the mat. See you there, Mara. She set the phone down, picked it up again, typed a message to Danny. Thanks for the heads up. I've seen worse. Danny's reply came in 40 seconds. 2.1 million subscribers now. This video is going to hit big. People are going to know your name before you even step on the mat. Mara thought about that, then typed, good. She put the phone face down and went back to the mat. The third shift of her second training week was a Friday, 12 hours, beginning at 7 p.m. By the time she got home, it was past 8 in the morning and she was running on institutional coffee and the particular stubborn energy that kicked in when her body had stopped complaining and started just enduring. She ate something, slept 4 hours, woke up at 1 in the afternoon with the firm intention of doing nothing useful. She lasted 20 minutes before she was on her mat. But something felt off in the session. Her timing was half a step behind, her left shoulder was carrying tension she couldn't work out, and twice she lost the thread of a combination mid-sequence, which wasn't a physical problem. It was a concentration problem, which meant it was a fatigue problem. She stopped after 30 minutes, sat on the mat with her back against the couch, and accepted the fact that she was tired. She stayed there, not sleeping, just breathing, and her mind went to Cole Vero, not Caden. Cole. She'd been thinking about him more than she'd acknowledged, not with anything personal attached to it, but with the specific attention she'd learned to pay to the element in a situation that didn't fit the pattern. Caden was legible, ambitious, performance-driven, threatened by what he couldn't categorize, compensating in the most visible way available to him. She'd known men like that her whole adult life. She knew exactly how they moved. Cole was something else. He fought with more patience than his brother. She'd watched enough of their public footage to know that. He made fewer mistakes because he made fewer assumptions. And that exchange in the gym, the first day, when he'd asked about her training background and she'd deflected, his response hadn't been to push or to perform. It had been to file the information and walk away. That was a different kind of opponent. She was still thinking about it when her phone rang. Not Danny this time. The number that had called twice before, the unknown one. She answered. Is this Mara Solis? A woman's voice, professional, not unfriendly. Depends on who's asking. My name is Renata Flynn. I'm a sports journalist at the Delmore Independent. I've been covering the Iron Peak tournament, and I'd like to speak with you about your registration, if you're open to it. Mara was quiet for a second. How did you get this number? The gym provided it as part of the public participant contact list. If that's a problem, I completely understand, and I won't reach out again. It shouldn't have been on a public list. She'd have to talk to Donahue about that. What are you looking to write? Honestly? The honest version of the story. Renata Flynn's voice was even. The Vero Force video has a particular narrative. I think there are some things about you that narrative doesn't include. I'm not interested in a fluff piece or a hit piece on either side. I want to know who you actually are. I'm a trauma nurse. Before that, there it was. The same question Cole Vero had asked, in almost identical words. That's a long answer, Mara said. I've got time. And if you don't want to give it to me, that's your right, and I'll write the story without your perspective. Mara stood up from the mat, walked to the window, looked at the street. A kid was riding a bike in slow circles on the sidewalk below, apparently just for the pleasure of the circles. I'll think about it, she said. That's fair. I'll send you my contact. No pressure and no deadline from my end. After the call, Mara stood at the window for a few minutes. The journalist wasn't the problem. The journalist was actually potentially useful if it came to needing the story told accurately. The problem was the amount of accuracy that would require. She hadn't told anyone at Hargrove Regional about her military background. She hadn't lied about it. She'd simply never volunteered it. And in the culture of a busy hospital, nobody pushed personal history unless it was clinically relevant. Petra knew she'd had some kind of training in the vague way that people recognized physical competence without being able to place it. Dr. Ellison, the department head, had once told her she had the kind of calm that usually came from either medication or experience, which had made Mara smile more than she'd shown. The people who knew were Danny and a small number of others from that period of her life scattered across the country, living quietly, doing other things. That was how she'd wanted it. That was a deliberate choice she'd made when she transitioned out, a choice about the kind of life she was building and what it needed to contain. Now a gym stunt and a viral video were creating pressure against that wall, and she had to decide how much of it to let move. She didn't decide that afternoon. She went back to the mat, did a better session than the first attempt, ate dinner, and went to sleep early. 12 days out, she went back to Iron Peak. This time with intention. She'd confirmed with Donahue's front desk that her regular membership still covered access to the facility outside the tournament, and she came in at a time she'd specifically chosen, mid-morning on a Tuesday, when the Vero brothers were unlikely to be present based on the schedule they'd publicly posted. She used the mat area for 2 hours. She wasn't hiding, she just had no interest in conducting her preparation in front of an audience, and certainly not an audience with live stream capability. She worked through everything she'd been doing at home, but in a real space, with real dimensions and a real surface, the particular solidity of a gym floor that a foam mat in an apartment couldn't replicate. Donahue himself came by about 40 minutes in. He was a large man who moved quietly, which she'd always found reassuring in someone whose job was to manage conflict. He watched her work for about a minute without saying anything. "Looking good," he said finally. "Thank you. You want the back training room? Private, no cameras. I cleared it for pre-tournament use." She paused her session. "Why?" He shrugged, but it wasn't indifferent. "Because you're a member of this gym, and members are entitled to train in this gym without being filmed by other members." He said it straightforwardly, no editorializing. "I should have addressed that earlier. I'm sorry I didn't." She looked at him for a moment. He meant it. She could tell the difference. "The back room would be useful. Thank you." She moved to the back room. It was smaller than the main area, but had what she needed. A mat, a heavy bag, a mirror she could use for form checks. She worked for another hour and a half, and when she finished, she was sweating completely through her shirt, and her legs had the particular deep fatigue that meant she'd worked at the right threshold. She was packing up when the door opened. Cole Vero stood in the doorway. He glanced at her bag, at the equipment, at her. His expression was the same measured thing it always was. "Donahue said you were back here," he said, "and you decided to come check." "I wanted to see something." He didn't move from the doorway. "The way you just trained. I could hear it from the hall." "And?" A pause. "You're not what we said you were." She zipped her bag closed. "No. My brother doesn't know that yet." "I'm aware." Cole leaned against the doorframe, arms loose at his sides. He wasn't posturing. She'd learned to read the difference between someone positioning themselves and someone who was genuinely uncertain what to do with what they were thinking. Cole Vero, right now, was the second thing. "Where'd you train?" he asked. "Actually train, not the gym cover answer." She picked up her bag. "Ask me again after the tournament." She walked past him into the hall. He didn't try to stop her and didn't follow. At the end of the hall, she heard him say quietly, mostly to himself, "Yeah. Okay." 9 days out, the video hit 4 million views. It found a second wave of attention when a larger sports commentary channel picked it up and ran a 15-minute breakdown of the original clip, analyzing Mara's body language, noting the way she'd moved when picking up her equipment, clocking what the commentator called an unusual kind of deliberateness for someone who supposedly never trained. The comment section of that video was different from the original. Still chaotic, still a cross-section of the internet, but with a different split. A significant number of people were not convinced by Kayden's narrative. Some had combat sports backgrounds and were pointing at specific things she'd done. The way she'd held her hands in the brief moment before she turned away, the angle of her stance, small tells that didn't read as civilian. Someone posted a comment that got 17,000 likes. "That's not a nurse who's scared. That's someone who chose not to. Big difference." Mara did not read her comment section. She found out about the sports commentary video from Petra, who texted her a link with a string of exclamation marks that Mara didn't fully decode. She watched it once, noted the analysis, and found it more accurate than she'd expected from a stranger's reading of a 60-second clip. What the video couldn't know, what nobody outside a very small number of people could know, was the specific nature of her training, not the gym version, not the general conditioning version, the actual version. The 4 years of a curriculum that combined combat medicine, tactical movement, close quarters training, and the management of high-stress decision-making in environments where the wrong choice had consequences that couldn't be revised. She had been in that curriculum because she was good at all of it, the physical parts and the judgment parts equally. And she had left it when she made a deliberate decision that she wanted to use those skills to help people live rather than to operate in situations where the alternative was the point. She was a nurse. She was a genuinely good nurse. Those two things, the one people saw and the one they didn't, weren't in conflict with each other. They came from the same place, the same fundamental orientation toward what mattered. She'd never experienced confusion about that, only the occasional inconvenience of other people's inability to hold both things at once. The inconvenience was becoming significant. On the 8th day before the tournament, Dr. Ellison called her into her office. Ellison was 61, had run the trauma department for 14 years, and had a manner that was simultaneously warm and completely intolerant of anything she considered theater. She did not ask Mara to sit. She came around her desk, leaned against it, and looked at her with the kind of directness that Mara had always respected. "You're in a tournament," Ellison said. "Yes. A martial arts tournament that is apparently now quite public." "Apparently." Ellison picked up her reading glasses from the desk and turned them over in her hands, a habit Mara had observed before when the woman was thinking through something she hadn't fully resolved. "I've been contacted by 2 journalists this week asking if Hargrove Regional would like to comment on your participation. I told them no. I want you to know that." "I appreciate it." "I also want to know if this is going to create a problem." Mara met her eyes. "What kind of problem?" "The kind where a nurse at my hospital is publicly associated with a spectacle that generates controversy, and that controversy comes back to this department." Ellison said it without apology. "That's a real concern, not a judgment about you personally." "I understand the concern." Mara held her gaze steadily. "I'm going to a combat sports event. I'm going to participate within the rules. Whatever happens, I'm not creating a spectacle. That was done for me before I signed up. I'm just showing up." Ellison looked at her for a long moment. "You were in the military." It wasn't a question. Mara didn't respond immediately. "I've run trauma departments for a long time," Ellison said quietly. "I know how people move who've been trained in high-stress environments. I noticed it when you interviewed. I didn't ask because it wasn't relevant to the job, and it still isn't relevant to the job." She put the glasses back down. "Is there anything I need to know before this becomes something I'm reading about instead of hearing from you?" Mara was quiet for 5 seconds. Then, "I served for 4 years. I left. What I can tell you is that nothing about this tournament is going to reflect badly on this hospital. I can't guarantee what the coverage looks like, but I can guarantee what I do." Ellison studied her, nodded once, slowly. "All right." She moved back around to her chair. "Take Thursday off. You've got the accumulated hours." It was the most indirect expression of support Mara had received from anyone outside her immediate circle, and it was entirely in character for the woman delivering it. Mara thanked her and left. She was halfway down the hall when she heard Ellison call after her. "Solis!" She turned. "Don't get hurt, Wum." 6 days out, Caden posted another video. This one was different. The first 3 minutes were the usual content. Training footage, preparation clips, the brothers working through drills with the camera tight on their technique. Then it shifted. Caden sat down in front of the camera in the gym, slightly more subdued than his usual register, and spoke for 6 minutes in what he clearly intended to be taken as authenticity. He said that he'd heard people were doubting them, that he understood the internet had decided to make the nurse into a symbol of something, which was their right, that he genuinely wished Mara Solis no ill will and wanted to make it clear that this was sport, not personal. And then, in the last 30 seconds, he said, "She told us she had nothing to prove to a camera, fair enough, But she entered a tournament that's going to be in front of cameras, so that answer doesn't quite cover it anymore. We'll find out what she's actually made of, and we'll be professional about it, but we will find out. Cole appeared in the final frame, standing behind his brother, and said nothing. Mara watched it 3 days after it was posted when Danny sent it to her. She noticed what Caden's delivery almost concealed. He was rattled. Not scared, rattled. Something had shifted in his reading of the situation, and whatever it was had introduced uncertainty he hadn't started with. She thought about Cole in the doorway of the back training room. You're not what we said you were. His brother didn't know that yet. Not completely. But something had filtered through. 5 days before the tournament, she called Danny back. I'm thinking about talking to the journalist, she said. Danny was quiet for a second. How much? Enough. Enough meaning what? Enough to let the truth get ahead of whatever story gets built after. She sat at her kitchen table, the same place she'd eaten toast the morning the first video went up. I don't want to explain myself, but I also don't want to spend the next 3 years correcting a narrative that could have been set straight now. Danny's voice was careful. That means the military background. Yes. You've protected that for 6 years. I know. So why now? Mara looked at the table. There was a small scratch near one corner that she'd been moving the table in through a narrow doorway 2 years ago. She looked at it for a moment. Because keeping it private was a choice I made for myself. And I still think it was the right choice. But these two men made a video that has 4 million people believing something about me that isn't true. And I've spent my whole adult life in situations where accurate information was the difference between the right outcome and the wrong one. She paused. I can manage my own privacy. I can't manage a lie if I don't correct it. A long pause on Danny's end. Okay, she said finally. Okay. Do you want me there? I'd like that, yeah. They met Renata Flynn at a coffee shop near the hospital 2 days before the tournament. Renata was in her mid-30s, sharp-eyed, with a recorder on the table that she asked permission to use before she turned it on. She asked good questions, the kind that were specific enough to mean she'd done significant research before the meeting and open enough that she wasn't just filling in blanks she'd already decided on. Mara told her what she'd decided to tell her. Not everything. There were things that weren't hers to share and would never be. But enough. The unit, the years, the nature of the training, the reason she'd left, the decision to become a nurse, the way the two versions of her life were connected rather than opposed. She said it plainly, without drama, the way she'd been trained to give a briefing, accurate, complete, no editorializing. Renata listened without interrupting. At the end, she looked at Mara and said, You know this is going to hit hard when it goes out. I know. Are you ready for that? Mara picked up her coffee. It had gone cold while she was talking. She drank it anyway. I've been ready for a lot of things that looked like they were going to hit hard, she said. This is not actually the most complicated thing I've prepared for. Renata smiled, not performatively, just a human response she couldn't quite suppress. When do you want me to publish? Mara thought about it. The tournament was in 2 days. Caden and Cole would see it before they stepped onto the mat. She thought about what that would do to Caden's preparation. The uncertainty, the recalibration, the performance anxiety of a man who had built his narrative around a specific version of her. She thought about what it would do to Cole, who already knew the version was wrong. Tomorrow morning, she said. Early. Renata nodded. She reached over and turned off the recorder. The coffee shop was warm and ordinary and smelled like roasting beans. Danny was reading something on her phone across the table, giving them the professional distance the conversation had required. Outside the window, Delmore was doing what it always did. Trucks on the freight road, pigeons on a crosswalk signal box, the ordinary motion of a city that didn't particularly care what happened inside any individual story running through it. Mara sat with her cold coffee and thought, tomorrow morning, the story changes shape. And 2 days after that, she would walk into Iron Peak and finish it. She was thinking that when her phone lit up on the table with a message from an unknown number, she almost didn't open it. Then she did. It was a photo. A screenshot of a text exchange between two people she couldn't identify from the contact names. They'd been blocked out. But the content was clear enough. Someone was planning to access the gym's HVAC system on the night before the tournament and damage the air handling units in the main mat area. The purpose, spelled out in the second message, was to force a postponement. The third message was a dollar figure, and the fourth was a name she didn't recognize, followed by the words, "Make sure Donahue doesn't find out until it's too late." Below the screenshot, one line of text. "Thought you should know. Don't reply to this number." She stared at it for 7 seconds. Then she called Donahue. Donahue picked up on the second ring. She didn't give him the preamble. She read him the content of the screenshot directly. The HVAC plan, the dollar figure, the name she couldn't identify. The timeline that put it at the night before the tournament. He was quiet while she spoke. The particular quiet of someone who was processing information and deciding simultaneously, which she recognized because she did it herself. "Send me the screenshot," he said. She did. 3 seconds later. "I'm calling my security contact tonight. Tournament infrastructure is staying locked. I'm also going to need to figure out who sent you this." "The number's blocked." "I know. There are other ways." A pause. "You okay?" "I'm fine. I just need the tournament to happen." "It's going to happen." His voice was flat and certain in a way that she believed. "Get some sleep." She put the phone down on the coffee shop table. Danny had looked up from her phone during the call, reading the room, and now she was looking at Mara with a question in her eyes that she was too professional to ask out loud in a public space. "Someone tried to get the tournament postponed," Mara said quietly. "Donahue's handling it." Danny's expression didn't change much, a slight tightening around the eyes. "Caden?" "I don't know." Renata Flynn was watching them both with the careful stillness of a journalist who understood that what was happening in front of her was part of the story and that interjecting would stop it. Mara looked at her. "This doesn't go in the article." "Understood," Renata said immediately. "Off the record from this moment." Mara nodded. She picked up her cold coffee, realized she'd already finished it, and set the cup back down. Her hands were steady. She noticed that they were steady and filed it away without commentary. Outside, the freight road was quieter now. Evening had settled over Delmore while they'd been inside, the particular blue-gray of a city dusk that happened fast this time of year. Tomorrow morning, the article would publish. In 2 days, she would walk into Iron Peak and do what she'd registered to do. Someone had just tried to make sure that day never came. That meant they were afraid of it. She found that clarifying rather than frightening. She always had. She slept 5 hours. Woke at 4:30 without the alarm, which was a thing her body did when something significant was pending. Not anxiety exactly, more like a calibration, the system coming online early to run checks. She lay still for 10 minutes, breathing, doing a mental inventory of where everything was. Her shoulder had resolved over the past week. Her left knee, which had a minor tracking issue she'd been managing with specific warm-up work, felt stable. She was carrying some general fatigue from the accumulated training load and the hospital shifts, but it was the manageable kind, the kind that burned off in the first 20 minutes of movement and left something cleaner underneath. She got up, made coffee, and sat at the table. At 5:53 a.m., her phone showed a notification from the Delmore Independent. She tapped it. The headline was, "Before the Mat, the full story of Mara Solis, trauma nurse, tournament competitor, and former special operations medic." She read it. All of it. Renata Flynn had written it the way she'd promised. Accurate, clean, no dramatic overreach. The military background was there, contextualized properly. The unit classification meant the specifics of her deployments were never named, but the nature of the training was described precisely. The distinction between her combat medicine role and a conventional service record laid out clearly for a civilian reader. The transition to nursing was framed correctly, not as a retreat from the military self, but as a continuation of the same fundamental orientation, just pointed in a different direction. The quotes were hers, verbatim. Nothing had been softened or sharpened beyond what she'd said. There was one paragraph near the end that she hadn't anticipated. Renata had spoken to Donahue, apparently, and included a quote from him. "I've been running this gym for 11 years. I've known a lot of people with serious training backgrounds. Mara Solis is the only one who's ever been here for months without once mentioning it. That's not something you see often. People who are genuinely good at something hard usually can't help talking about it. She just trains." She read that twice. Then she put the phone down. By 6:15, the article had been shared 400 times. By 7, it had been picked up by 2 larger regional outlets. By 8, when she was lacing up her shoes for a light movement session, not training, just blood flow, keeping the engine warm, Her phone had so many notifications she turned it to silent and left it on the table. She did her session in the living room, slow and deliberate, 40 minutes of movement that was less about preparation and more about being present in her own body on a day when a lot of forces were trying to make her exist primarily in other people's narratives. When she finished, she showered, ate a real breakfast, eggs, toast, a banana, things with actual caloric value, and sat with the second coffee of the morning, thinking about nothing in particular, which was a skill she'd worked on specifically because her mind's default was to keep processing, keep analyzing, and sometimes the most useful thing was to run quiet. Her phone, face up on the table, lit with a call. The name read Cole Varro. She looked at it for 2 rings, then picked up. "I read the article," he said. "Okay." A pause. His voice was different from the gym register she was used to. Not the performance version, not the assessment mode. Something more uncertain, which made it more human. "I want you to know that the HVAC thing wasn't us." She hadn't told him about the HVAC thing, which meant he knew about it from somewhere else. "How do you know what I'm referring to?" she said. Another pause, longer. "Because I'm the one who sent you the screenshot." The kitchen was very quiet. She set her coffee down. "Why?" "Because Caden didn't do it directly. Someone in his... There are people around him, people who help with the channel, who make things happen. One of them put it together without telling me." His voice had an edge she hadn't heard before, something controlled and tightly wound. "I found out last night. I don't do things like that. Whatever you think of the videos, I don't sabotage events." She let that sit. "Why tell me and not Donahue?" "I didn't know how to explain it without explaining everything, and I didn't want..." He stopped, started again. "I wasn't sure you'd trust it coming from me, but you needed to know." She leaned back in her chair. She was running a rapid and unsentimental assessment of the likelihood that this was itself a tactic, a manipulation designed to create sympathy or confusion before the tournament. She gave it real consideration and arrived at low, but not 0. Cole Varro was the more strategic twin, and strategy could include this kind of move. But the texture of his voice was not performing. She'd spent 4 years in situations where the difference between a genuine statement and a calculated one had stakes considerably higher than a martial arts bracket, and she'd gotten good at reading it. Not infallible. Good. "Does your brother know you called me?" she said. "No." "Are you going to tell him?" A beat. "I don't know yet." She picked up her coffee. "I appreciate the information," she said. "I'll see you tomorrow." She hung up, sat with it for a minute. Then she called Donahue and told him what Cole had said. Not to redirect the security response, which should continue regardless, but because Donahue deserved the full picture and because she'd learned a long time ago that the person responsible for a space needed accurate information to protect it. Donahue's response was 3 words: "I'll handle it." She believed him. Tournament morning arrived the way significant days always did. Unremarkably at first, the alarm, the gray light through the curtain, the body stiff from sleep and needing to be coaxed back into readiness. She gave herself 90 minutes before she needed to leave. She used them efficiently, the warm-up sequence she'd refined over the past 3 weeks. Breakfast that was smaller than yesterday's because fighting on a full stomach was its own problem. The deliberate process of packing her bag with everything required and nothing unnecessary. She checked her phone once. The article was at 60,000 shares. There were responses from the Varro Force community, she didn't read them, and responses from the combat sports community, which she read briefly and found largely accurate in their assessment of what the situation was. There was a message from Dr. Ellison that said only, "Good luck. Don't come in tonight," which meant Ellison had read the article and was giving her the evening off regardless of outcome, which was both practical and, in Ellison's understated register, something close to warm. There was a message from Danny. "I'm in the parking lot at Iron Peak. Got here an hour ago. Donahue gave me a corner in the back. I'll be there when you arrive. You've done harder things than this. Go be yourself." She put the phone in her bag and drove. Iron Peak was unrecognizable, not architecturally. The building was the same converted warehouse, the same brick exterior, the same hand-painted signage above the entrance. But the space around it had been transformed by the tournament's reach. There were cars she didn't recognize in the lot and up the street. A local news van was parked at the far end, its satellite rig extended, People in Varoforce merchandise were clustered near the entrance taking photos of each other. Inside, she could already hear the ambient noise of a crowd that had compressed into a space designed for a gym and was straining against its dimensions. She went in through the side entrance Donahue had flagged for competitors. The back corridor smelled the same as always, rubber and chalk, and the particular industrial cleanliness of a well-maintained facility. She found the competitors' area, a set of rooms off the main corridor that had been cleared and set up with chairs and equipment tables. Danny was there, as promised, in a corner with a small bag and the specific alert stillness of someone who had spent time in high-stakes environments and knew how to be present without generating noise. They didn't hug. They looked at each other for a second, and then Danny said, "Your shoulder? Fine. Knee? Managing. Head? Clear." Danny nodded. "Good." She sat back down. "Your first match is in 40 minutes. Woman named Okafor. Not me, different Okafor, I checked. She's been competing for 3 years, solid ground game, likes to work from the outside. She's going to try to take you down early." "I know. I've seen her previous matches on the gym's website." "Of course you have." Danny almost smiled. "The Varo bracket is on the other side. You won't see them until the final rounds, if the bracket holds." Mara set her bag down and began the final phase of her warm-up. Light, deliberate, bringing her heart rate to the right threshold without peaking too early. She could hear the crowd through the walls, the particular electricity of people waiting for something to happen. She'd felt that energy before in different contexts, and what she'd learned was that it was neither useful nor harmful in itself. It was just noise. The mat was where the actual information was. She was mid-sequence when a tournament official appeared in the doorway and said her name. Time to move. The main floor had been reconfigured with 2 competition mats side by side, a scoring table, and an officiating crew she recognized from the posted credentials as legitimate, not gym friends, actual certified officials. The crowd had packed the perimeter, standing 3 and 4 deep in places. The news van crew had a camera position in the far corner, and elevated above the main crowd, she could see the Varoforce production setup. 2 cameras on tripods, a lighting rig, Caden in a branded jacket talking to someone with a headset, while Cole stood slightly apart, arms folded. Cole saw her when she walked onto the floor. His expression didn't change. He nodded, once, barely perceptible. She didn't respond. She had work to do. Her first match lasted 6 minutes and 40 seconds. Her opponent was technically sound and, as Danny had predicted, went for a takedown in the first 40 seconds. Mara had been expecting it and used the attempt's momentum instead of resisting it, turning the exchange in a direction that put her in the stronger position. From there, it was patient, precise work. Not showy, not fast, just accurate. She ended the match by submission, a shoulder lock applied with exactly the pressure required and not more, and she released it the moment her opponent tapped. The crowd's reaction was loud and confused in the way that crowds react when something happens that doesn't match their prepared response. They'd been ready for either a quick loss or a scrappy, adrenaline-fueled brawl. What they'd seen was something else, controlled, almost clinical, the kind of precision that read as effortless but clearly wasn't. She walked back to the competitors' area without looking at the Varoforce cameras. Danny handed her water. "Good." "She's technically solid. I got lucky with the angle on the takedown read." "You didn't get lucky. You were watching her feet for the first 30 seconds, and you knew which direction she favored." Mara drank. "Same thing." "It really isn't." She had 20 minutes before the semifinal. She used them to keep moving. Nothing intense, just staying warm, staying present. Through the walls, she could hear a match on the other mat, the crowd reacting to something, a score being announced. She didn't try to track it. She'd know what she needed to know when she needed to know it. The semifinal was harder. Her opponent this time was a woman who had been competing for 8 years and had a read on Mara's approach by the 90-second mark. She'd clearly watched the first match from somewhere, adapted her game plan on the fly, and was executing it with the kind of calm that Mara recognized as genuine expertise rather than nerves masquerading as control. They worked through 3 exchanges that neither of them won cleanly. Mara took a hit to her right side in the second minute that wasn't bad but wasn't nothing, and she filed it away. Not ignored, just categorized as manageable and moved past. She won on points in the final seconds of the round, 2 points from a positional advantage she'd worked for the entire match. It wasn't clean. Her right side was going to be sore tomorrow. She accepted both of these facts with equal equanimity. She was breathing through her cooldown when the bracket update went up on the screen beside the scoring table. Final match. Mara Solis versus Caden Varro. The crowd read it at the same time she did. The noise it produced was substantial. She looked at the bracket. Then she looked across the floor to where Caden was standing with his production team, reading the same thing. He looked up, found her eyes across the distance, and held them. His expression had been through several iterations since this morning. She'd caught glimpses between matches, had seen the article's impact working through his performance face like a structural problem he couldn't quite plaster over. Right now it was locked into something determined and hard, the look of a man who has decided that the only way out of a narrative is through it. Cole was standing just behind his brother's shoulder. He wasn't looking at the bracket. He was looking at Mara. And his expression was the one she'd come to read correctly over the past weeks. The honest one, without the overlay of performance. It was not entirely comfortable. She turned away and went to find Danny. The break between the semifinal and the final was 20 minutes. She used the first 10 to let her body process the previous match, staying warm, checking her right side, confirming the bruising was superficial, the kind of thing she assessed clinically rather than emotionally. Danny brought her water and stayed quiet, which was the most useful thing available. In the 11th minute, Donahue appeared at the door of the competitor's area. His face was doing something that required her full attention. "We have a situation," he said. She looked at him. "The HVAC." "No, that's handled." He came into the room and closed the door behind him. "One of my staff just found a man in the equipment room who shouldn't have been here. He had a camera on him, small, the kind you'd use for covert capture. He's being held by my security contact and the police are 3 minutes out." He paused. "He had a media pass from Vero Force." The room was quiet. Mara and Danny looked at each other. "What was he trying to film?" Mara said. "The competitor preparation areas, specifically yours." Donahue's voice was controlled and very flat. "There's a secondary camera we found in the hallway outside this room. It's been here since setup this morning." She absorbed this without visible reaction, which required more than usual. The particular cold quality of it, the premeditation, the setup, the fact that someone had planned this before the day began, landed differently than the original video had. That had been opportunistic cruelty. This was something more deliberate. "The police are going to want a statement," Donahue said, "from you once the match is over. The Vero Force pass holder is claiming he acted independently, but..." He stopped. "His phone has messages on it. My security contact saw them before she locked it. The messages reference the channel. They reference the plan for today specifically." Mara looked at the floor for exactly 2 seconds. Then she looked up. "Is the tournament continuing?" Donahue blinked. Yes. Yes, the officials have confirmed. The situation is contained." "Then I need the next 8 minutes to finish preparing." He looked at her. Something in his expression shifted into something that wasn't quite admiration, but was close to it. The look of someone watching another person make a decision under conditions that would have derailed most people. "All right," he said. "I'll have the officials hold the final start time by 5 minutes. You've got 13. He left. The door closed. Danny let out a breath. "Mara, I know. That's the covert camera. That's criminal. That's not a content dispute anymore. I know." She picked up her water, drank, set it down. Her right side ached steadily. She assessed it again, confirmed her earlier assessment, moved on. "I can't do anything about that right now. Right now there's a match." Danny was quiet for a moment. Then, "He's going to know his guy got caught, Caden, by the time you walk out there." "I know. That makes him unpredictable." "Yes." "Unpredictable is dangerous." "Yes." She began her final warm-up sequence, moving through it with precision. "Unpredictable is also readable, if you know what to look for. A man who's panicking makes specific kinds of mistakes." She worked through a shoulder rotation, careful with the right side, smooth on the left. "I've dealt with unpredictable in conditions where the consequences were considerably worse than losing a match." Danny watched her for a moment. "I know you have," she said quietly. 12 minutes later, Mara walked through the door and back onto the floor. The crowd noise hit her like weather, physical, immediate, pressing in from every side. The news camera tracked her entry. The Vero Force cameras tracked her entry. She didn't look at either. She looked at the mat, then at the officials, then at Caden Vero, who was already standing at his corner, and whose face, when she finally looked at it, told her immediately and clearly that he knew. Not everything, maybe, but enough. The carefully managed expression was fractured in ways he couldn't quite seal. His jaw was too tight. His hands were opening and closing at his sides in a rhythm that wasn't intentional. Cole was somewhere behind the line at the edge of the floor. She didn't look for him. The head official called them to the center of the mat. She walked forward. Caden walked forward. They stood 3 feet apart, and up close his agitation was even more visible. A faint tremor in his shoulders, the kind of thing that most people in the crowd wouldn't catch, but that she caught immediately because she'd spent years reading bodies under stress. The official gave the pre-match instructions. Both fighters acknowledged. The crowd went, not entirely quiet, but as quiet as it was going to get. Caden looked at her, and for a fraction of a second, beneath the performance and the panic and the public collapse of a narrative he'd invested in completely, she saw something that she hadn't expected. He was genuinely afraid. Not of her exactly. Of what was about to happen. Of the distance between who he'd said he was and what the next few minutes were going to make visible. She looked back at him with an expression that gave him nothing. No contempt, no reassurance, no performance in either direction. The official raised his hand, and in the corridor outside the competitor preparation area, a door she couldn't see from the mat swung open, and 2 police officers walked into Iron Peak with an expression on their faces that suggested they had questions that were not going to wait until after the match was over. The official's hand came down. Caden moved first, which she'd expected. Men who were afraid and performing confidence almost always initiated early, trying to establish control of the tempo before the situation could establish it for them. He came in with a combination she'd seen in his training footage, a right jab that was meant to gauge distance, followed by a low kick aimed at her lead leg. Textbook opening. Competent, practiced, the kind of thing that worked against most opponents at this level. She wasn't most opponents at this level. She stepped off the line of the jab, not back, to the side, which took her out of the kick's path and put her at an angle he hadn't prepared for. He adjusted, recovered faster than she'd expected, which told her the fear in his shoulders hadn't reached his feet yet. His footwork was still clean. She filed that information and kept moving. The first 90 seconds were careful on both sides. He was good. She'd always known he was good. The videos weren't fabricated. The black belt was real. And he was fighting with the particular focused aggression of someone who had something to prove and knew the clock was running on his ability to prove it. She could feel the crowd's uncertainty and the ambient noise around them, the way it kept starting and stopping, people who'd come expecting one story finding themselves inside a different one. She absorbed 2 more exchanges without committing to a response. She was reading him, not just his technique, which was solid, but the decision-making underneath it, the pattern of when he chose power over positioning, when he reset, when his eyes moved to the cameras. He glanced at the Vero Force cameras 3 times in the first 2 minutes. 3 times. She counted because it mattered. A fighter who broke focus to check his angles for the recording was a fighter who was splitting his attention, and split attention was a vulnerability she could use without exploiting anything beyond what was already there. In the 3rd minute, she engaged properly for the first time. She'd identified his tell, a slight drop of the left shoulder preceding his strongest combination, so subtle that it probably wasn't visible from the crowd's distance but was entirely clear from 3 feet away. When she saw it, she didn't counter immediately. She let the combination come, deflected the first 2 strikes, absorbed the third on her guard. It landed harder than comfortable, nothing structural, and used his forward momentum to push the exchange into a clinch that she controlled. From the clinch she worked, not flashily, efficiently. The kind of positional grinding that doesn't look like much from the outside but systematically dismantles a fighter's ability to generate offense. She could feel him trying to create space, trying to re-establish range where his striking was most effective. And she didn't let him. Not with power. She was smaller and wasn't trying to overpower him, but with angles and timing, with the particular skill of making her opponent work harder than her for every inch of the match. The crowd started to understand something was happening. The noise changed quality. Less excitement, more attention. The shift from watching a spectacle to watching something that required comprehension. At 3 minutes 40 seconds, she created a clean opening and took it. The takedown was not the highlight reel version. It was ungraceful. She went for it. He partially defended. They went to the mat together in a tangle that took 2 seconds to resolve, but she resolved it correctly, and she came out of the tangle in the top position with control of his right arm. He bridged hard, trying to reverse, and she let him use the energy of it against himself, riding the movement and using it to improve her position rather than fighting it directly. He was strong. She'd known that. Stronger than her by a meaningful margin, and when he got his hips under him, he generated the kind of torque that could break a hold if the hold was purely muscular. Hers wasn't. She'd been taught to build positions that were structural rather than forceful, the same principle she used in manual patient transfers at the hospital: leverage and angle, not raw effort. She worked for 40 more seconds. Then she found the position she'd been building toward: a shoulder lock, clean and controlled, the same submission she'd used in the first match, and she applied it with the precise and measured pressure of someone who understood exactly where the threshold was between discomfort and injury and had every intention of staying well clear of the second. Caden held for 4 seconds. She felt him trying to calculate whether he could power through it, whether there was an escape she hadn't covered. There wasn't. She'd covered them, and the angle of the lock was such that holding longer wasn't courage. It was the specific kind of stubbornness that led to torn ligaments, and she could feel the moment his body told him that before his brain quite accepted it. He tapped. The crowd's reaction was not the clean roar of a decisive knockout or a dramatic last-second reversal. It was something more complicated, loud, sustained, with a confused undertow, the sound of thousands of people processing an outcome that contradicted the story they'd arrived with. She released the hold immediately, the way she always did, and was on her feet and 2 steps back before Caden had finished sitting up. She looked at the official, got the confirmation, turned toward her corner. She didn't look at the cameras. She didn't look at the crowd. She looked at Danny, who was standing at the edge of the mat with an expression that was tightly controlled in the way of someone who had been genuinely unsure of the outcome and was only now letting herself feel what she'd been holding. Mara reached her. Danny handed her water. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "Your side," Danny said finally. "It's fine. That hit in the bruising. I'll ice it tonight." She drank. Her hands were trembling slightly, which she hadn't noticed during the match. Adrenaline clearing. Normal. Expected. Not a problem. Behind her, the tournament floor was reorganizing itself. Officials conferring, the scoring table updating the bracket, the crowd noise settling into 1,000 separate conversations. She heard her name spoken multiple times in the ambient noise, different voices, different tones, some of them still confused, some of them not. She didn't turn around to see Caden Vero's face. She didn't need to. The police were still in the building. She'd seen them when she walked off the mat. 2 officers near the side corridor, a third in conversation with Donahue near the equipment room entrance. The situation with the covert camera had not resolved itself in the 20 minutes of the final match. If anything, it had expanded. She learned from Donahue, who found her in the competitor's room 7 minutes after the match ended, that the man with the Vero Force media pass had not been alone. A second individual had been identified on the security footage entering through the facility's secondary entrance 2 hours before the event started. He'd been carrying equipment consistent with the hidden camera setup and had used a credential that turned out to be fraudulent, a cloned version of a legitimate tournament volunteer pass. 2 people, she said. 2 people, coordinated entry, pre-positioned equipment. Donahue sat in a folding chair with the particular heaviness of a man who ran a legitimate business and was cataloging the ways it had been violated. "My security contact is giving a full statement. The officers want yours when you're ready." "I'm ready now." "You just finished a match." "I know when I finished the match." She sat across from him, still in her competition clothes, water bottle in hand. "What else?" He looked at her steadily. "The pass holder is talking. He's been talking since they brought him into the room. He's not a hardened operator. He's a 23-year-old content assistant who got handed a job that turned out to be illegal and is now trying very hard to minimize his own exposure." A pause. "He's named Caden directly. Twice. On record." The room was quiet except for the muffled crowd noise still moving through the walls. Danny was in the corner, listening without participating, the same way she'd been trained to process information in situations where interjecting served no purpose. "Where's Caden now?" Mara said. "Main floor. He hasn't left." Donahue's voice was careful. "Cole is with him." She thought about Cole, the phone call the morning before. I don't do things like that. She believed it then and believed it now, which didn't mean he was absent from the consequences. You couldn't build a shared operation with someone for years and claim clean hands when that operation crossed a line. But the specific culpability was different, and she wasn't in the business of flattening distinctions that existed. She gave her statement to the officer who came to the competitor's room 15 minutes later. It was detailed and accurate. The original video incident, the unknown number screenshot, the conversation with Donahue, what Cole had told her, all of it laid out in the sequence it had happened with the same precision she used for clinical incident documentation. The officer took notes and recorded it. He told her she might be contacted for follow-up and that the investigation was ongoing. She thanked him, and he left. Danny waited until the door closed. This is going to be a criminal matter. Yes. Invasion of privacy, potentially. Conspiracy to disrupt a licensed event if the HVAC plan is connected. Probably. Mara finished her water. That's for other people to navigate. It's not my job to prosecute it. No, Danny said, but it is going to follow him. She didn't respond to that. She changed out of her competition clothes, packed her bag, and put ice from the first aid station on her right side for 12 minutes, which was the minimum effective window for acute soft tissue intervention. It hurt less than she'd expected, which either meant it was superficial or she was still running enough residual adrenaline to be unreliable as her own assessor. She decided to treat it as superficial and get it properly checked if it was still bothering her in 48 hours. She was shouldering her bag when the door opened again. Cole Vero stood in the doorway. He looked like he'd aged several years in the past 2 hours, which was not an observation she made with any satisfaction. He was alone. "Can I come in?" he said. She looked at him, then at Danny, who gave her nothing useful either direction, which was probably the most honest response available. "Yes," Mara said. He came in, didn't sit, stood near the door with his hands in the front pocket of his jacket. Not aggressive, not performing, just occupying space in the way of someone who wasn't sure what his body should be doing. "I didn't know about the cameras," he said. "The ones here, today. I need you to know that." "I do know that." Something shifted in his face. "You believe me?" "Yes." He exhaled slowly. "Caden is talking to a lawyer on the phone. He's—" Cole stopped, looked at the floor briefly, then back at her. "He made decisions today that I didn't know about and wouldn't have agreed to. And I don't know how to explain to you how that's possible when we've been doing everything together for 4 years, except to say that somewhere in the last year, it became more important to him to control the narrative than to actually—" He stopped again, pressed his lips together. "I should have seen it earlier." "Probably," she said. "It wasn't cruel. It was just accurate. He absorbed it. The article this morning, the journalist piece." His voice was quieter now. "I didn't know any of that. What you did before the nursing. Any of it. No. I knew something was there. When you deflected, the first time I asked, I knew the answer was bigger than you were giving." "Yes." "I told Caden you weren't what he thought you were." "I know. You told me." He didn't listen. Cole's jaw worked for a second. He never listens when he's already decided how the story goes. The room was quiet. Danny had shifted slightly, moving from actively listening to giving them the minimal privacy the space allowed. Outside, the crowd noise was beginning to change character. Thinning as people left, but different pockets of intensity where conversations were happening that had weight to them. Mara looked at Cole Vero and made the assessment she'd been forming for weeks, the complete version. He was not a bad person who had done bad things. He was a good person who had stayed too long in a collaboration that had gradually become something he hadn't signed up for, and had stayed because the momentum of it was familiar, and the alternative required a rupture he hadn't known how to make. She'd seen that pattern before. It wasn't unique to him. It didn't make him blameless. It made him human in a specific and recognizable way. "What are you going to do?" she said. He looked at her directly. "I don't know yet." Then, "The channel? What happened today? The cameras? The police? That's the end of Vero Force. I know that. It might be the end regardless of what the investigation finds, but it's definitely the end if what I think happened is what happened." He unclenched his hands from his pockets. "I've been competing for 9 years. That's real, whatever else was around it. I'd like to keep competing." "Then compete," she said, "separately, on your own terms." He nodded slowly. It wasn't a clean resolution. She could see that he knew it wasn't. There were legal processes beginning that neither of them controlled, consequences that would take time to fully arrive. A relationship between two brothers that had broken along a fault line that had probably been there longer than either of them had wanted to see. None of that resolved in a competitor's room at the back of a gym in Delmore. But he nodded, and she let that be enough for the moment. He left. The door closed. Danny uncrossed her arms. That was generous. It was accurate, Mara said. Generous is different. Sometimes they look the same from the outside. Mara picked up her bag. Her right side protested at the weight. She adjusted the strap. Let's go. They were in the main corridor heading toward the side exit when Renata Flynn appeared from the direction of the main floor, moving with the focused energy of a journalist who had been watching something develop all day and had more questions than she'd started with. I need 5 minutes, Renata said. 2, Mara said, without stopping. Renata matched her pace. The police presence, the cameras found in the facility, the Veroforce pass holder in custody. She was reading from a small notebook, keeping up without looking down. Is this connected to your registration? You'd need to ask the police about the investigation. I'm asking you about your experience of today. Mara slowed but didn't stop. I came to compete in a tournament. I competed. I won. Whatever else happened is a matter for the appropriate authorities, and I'll cooperate fully with any process that requires it. She glanced at Renata. That's your quote. Renata wrote it. The match? The final. You want to say anything about it? I won on submission. It was a competitive match. He's a legitimate fighter. That's a generous characterization given the context. It's an accurate one. She reached the side door, pushed it open. The evening air of the freight district hit them, cool, slightly industrial, the smell of the river a few blocks over. The story you already have is the right one. Don't add things to it that aren't there. Renata stopped at the doorway. One more thing. Her voice changed register slightly. Still professional, but something underneath it that was more personal. You knew, when you talked to me 2 days ago, that this was going to be significant. The article, the tournament, all of it. You chose to let it happen in public. Mara stood in the doorway with the evening at her back. Yes. Why? You could have handled this privately. Filed a complaint about the original video, talked to the gym, stayed out of it. She thought about it for a second, giving the question the honest consideration it deserved, rather than the deflecting answer that was easier. Because private would have been convenient for me and invisible to everyone else, she said. And the point wasn't convenience, the point was truth. Truth needs to be visible to be useful. She let the door close between them and walked to the parking lot with Danny. Well, the article Renata published the following morning was the one that spread, not the pre-tournament profile, that had done its work and she'd read it and been satisfied with its accuracy. This was the follow-up, the full account of the tournament day. The match, the covert cameras, the police presence, the investigation that the Delmore Independent had now confirmed was formal and ongoing. It had the same qualities as the first piece. Specific, sourced, not dramatized. It didn't need dramatization. The events themselves had done that work. By noon, the story had been picked up by 6 outlets. By evening, 32. The sports commentary community that had previously debated the original gym video now had something considerably more substantial to process, and they processed it loudly. Veroforce's social channels went from active to static within hours. The posts were still there, but new content stopped. Engagement crashed as the context for all of it changed, and the comment sections turned into something neither brother would want to read. Mara knew this the way she knew most things about the situation's public dimension, at a remove, through Danny and Petra, and the ambient information that filtered into her days without her actively seeking it. She was back at the hospital 2 days after the tournament, working a shift that ran 10 hours and involved 3 separate situations that required everything she had. The bruising on her right side was exactly what she'd assessed it as: superficial, uncomfortable, resolved within a week. She iced it, monitored it, documented it for her own records, and moved on. She didn't read the comment sections. She didn't monitor the view counts. She turned down 3 media interview requests that came through the hospital's communications department, lightly, through the appropriate channel, without explanation. She called Danny on Thursday. They talked for 40 minutes about things that had nothing to do with Iron Peak or the Veros or any of it. Danny's workshop, a patient case Mara was managing that had an interesting procedural complexity, a book Danny had read and wanted to talk about. It was an ordinary conversation between two people with a long history, and Mara found it more restorative than anything else she'd done in the past 2 weeks. She went back to Iron Peak the following Monday. She hadn't planned to go back so quickly. She'd half expected to need more distance from the place than a week. But she was driving back from a morning run when she passed the freight district and turned without quite deciding to, and 10 minutes later she was in the parking lot. The gym looked the same. The brick exterior, the hand-painted sign. Two people she recognized from regular morning sessions were standing near the entrance talking. They saw her, and both of them stopped talking, which could have felt like many things and was actually simple. They weren't sure what to say, which meant they had something to say but didn't know how to start it. One of them, a man named Garrett, who'd been a regular at Iron Peak longer than she had and who'd been in the gym the day of the original incident, said, "Hey." "Hey," she said. "Good tournament," he said. "Thanks." He nodded. She went inside. Donahue was behind the front desk talking to a staff member about an equipment order. He looked up when she came through the door. A pause. Then, "Membership's still active," he said. "Back room's open until 10. "Thank you," she said. She changed, went to the back room, and trained. Not the tournament preparation intensity. That phase was over. Not the maintenance mode routine she'd had before the registration either. Something that felt like a new version, calibrated to where she was now, which was a different place than where she'd been in either direction. She worked for 90 minutes, and it was imperfect and inconsistent, and her shoulder had a minor catch in the third set that she stopped to address before continuing, and by the end she was sweating completely through her shirt, and her right side reminded her it wasn't quite healed, and she felt, underneath all of that, something she recognized as grounded. She was cooling down when the door opened. Not Cole this time. Donahue. He came in and closed the door and leaned against the wall with his arms folded and the expression of a man who had something to say and was deciding how to say it. She waited. "The gym association that certifies this facility contacted me yesterday," he said. "They want to formally recognize the tournament. The charity proceeds are confirmed. Came out to more than they expected, probably because of the coverage." He paused. "They also told me that 2 of our regular members filed separate complaints with the association about the Veros' behavior over the past year, both before the tournament. Both were sitting in a queue that hadn't been processed." He looked at her steadily. "The association is now reviewing the complaint files and they've recommended a formal membership suspension for both brothers, pending the investigation outcomes." She absorbed this. "Were the complaints people I know?" "I don't think so. Just people who'd been here and didn't feel like they had recourse." He uncrossed his arms. "I wanted you to know. Because what happened last week created enough visibility that things that were sitting still started moving. I think that matters." She picked up her water bottle, drank. "How's the gym?" He looked slightly surprised by the question. "Good. Busy. Had 6 new membership inquiries this week." A pause. "Seems like some people saw the tournament coverage and wanted to check the place out." "That's good," she said. "Yeah." He looked at her for another moment. "We're hosting a youth training session next month. For the after-school program, the tournament was benefiting. I don't have enough certified instructors to cover it adequately." He said it without inflection. It was not quite a question and not quite not a question. She looked at him. "Send me the schedule." He nodded, left. She finished her cool down and packed her bag. She was moving toward the door when her phone buzzed twice in quick succession. She checked it. Not habit, intentional, because the double buzz was the pattern she'd set for messages from numbers she'd specifically flagged. The first message was from Renata Flynn. "Investigation update. DA's office has confirmed they're reviewing the evidence for charges. Thought you'd want to know. No comment needed." The second was from a number she didn't recognize. She opened it. The message was 4 lines. No introduction, no name, no identifying information. Just, "The channel is being deleted tonight. It was my decision. I know that doesn't fix anything. The people who were hurt by the videos deserve better than an apology from a platform going dark. For what it's worth, I told him months ago it had gone too far. I should have said it louder. I'm sorry." She read it twice. There was no ambiguity about who had sent it. The number wasn't Cole's. He'd called her from his own number before, which meant this was a secondary line, a privacy measure of the same kind she might have used herself in a situation where she wanted to say something true without attaching it to a traceable identity. She stood in the corridor of Iron Peak for a moment, holding her phone, reading the message a third time. She didn't respond. There wasn't anything to say that would be more accurate than silence. The apology was real, she believed that. And it was also insufficient in the specific way that apologies for large things are almost always insufficient, which didn't make them not worth making. She put the phone in her pocket, pushed through the side exit into the evening. The freight district was doing its evening thing. The last trucks of the day moving through, the restaurant at the end of the block beginning its dinner service, lights coming on above the river. She stood for a moment outside the gym with her bag on her shoulder and her right side giving her a dull periodic reminder of the week's events, and she breathed the cool air and let the day settle. Something was unfinished. She felt it the way she always felt incomplete situations, not anxiously, just with the particular awareness of a person who paid attention to what was and wasn't resolved. The investigation was ongoing. The legal processes had their own timeline. The full consequences for Caden Vero, whatever those turned out to be, were not yet visible. And then her phone buzzed again. Not Renata this time. Not an unknown number. The caller ID read, Hargrove Regional Administration. Hospital administration didn't call nurses directly at 7 in the evening unless something was significantly wrong. She answered, Ms. Solis. A voice she didn't recognize. Not Ellison, someone from the administrative layer, careful and precise. I apologize for the late contact. We've had a situation come to our attention that requires some discussion. Are you available tomorrow morning before your shift? Yes. What kind of situation? A pause. The specific pause of someone who has been told to convey information carefully. It pertains to your public profile following recent events and a request we've received from an external party regarding your employment history. Another pause. I'd rather discuss the specifics in person. She was very still on the sidewalk. Can you tell me the nature of the external party? I can tell you it arrived through legal channels, the voice said, and that we're taking it seriously. A final pause. I want to be clear that this is a preliminary conversation, not a formal proceeding, but we do need to have it. She thanked the person and ended the call. She stood in the freight district evening with the river smell in the air and the trucks moving and the restaurant at the end of the block doing its ordinary business. And she ran the conversation back through her mind with the particular precision she used for information that needed to be assessed quickly and accurately. Someone had contacted the hospital about her employment through legal channels. In the 48 hours following a criminal investigation that had publicly named Caden Vero and was moving toward charges. She didn't have enough information to be certain, but she'd spent enough time in situations where the available information pointed clearly enough in one direction that certainty wasn't required before you started thinking about what came next. She called Danny. I need a lawyer, she said, someone who handles both employment and criminal defense. Not for me on the criminal side, for understanding the scope of what someone else might attempt through civil or administrative channels. Danny was quiet for exactly 1 second. Someone's coming at you through the hospital. Possibly. I have a meeting with administration tomorrow morning. Okay. Another second. I know someone. She's in Delmore. She's good. She owes me a professional favor from 2 years ago that she's been waiting for me to call in. A pause that had something underneath it. Not worry exactly, something more alert. Mara, this means he's not done. I know, she said. Even with the investigation, even with the cameras, even with everything today, he's trying to find another way to make this cost you something. Yes, she heard Danny breathe. Are you okay? She looked at the river lights coming on in the distance above the roofline of the freight district, steady and ordinary in the evening. Her right side ached. Her bag was on her shoulder. The day had been long and was apparently not finished with her yet. I'm okay, she said. It was true. It was also incomplete, the way accurate statements about complex situations usually were. I'll text you her number tonight, Danny said. Call her before you go in tomorrow. I will. She ended the call, started walking to her car. The freight district moved around her, trucks, lights. The city doing what it always did, indifferent to any individual story inside it. She had a meeting in the morning. Before that, she had a phone call to make. And before that, she had an evening to get through. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, she needed to eat something and sleep, because tomorrow was going to require everything she had, and she'd learned a long time ago that you didn't enter a difficult situation running on empty if you could avoid it. She got in her car. She sat for a moment. She looked at her phone, at Renata's message, at the anonymous 4 lines from a secondary number, at the missed log of everything the past 3 weeks had generated, and then she put it face down on the passenger seat and drove. Whatever Caden Vero had sent to Hargrove Regional, whatever legal channel it had arrived through, whatever he thought it would accomplish, she would find out in the morning. What she already knew was this: a man who had every resource at his disposal, who had spent a month building a public narrative about her, who had deployed 2 people to illegally surveil a licensed event, was now reaching into her professional life through an administrative door, and he still didn't know who he was dealing with. She called the lawyer at 7 the next morning, standing in her kitchen with coffee she hadn't tasted yet, and the particular focused quiet of someone who had slept 6 hours by choice rather than circumstance, and was spending the first minutes of the day getting her information in order. The lawyer's name was Simone Adler. She answered on the second ring, which suggested Danny had already texted her. Her voice was direct, unhurried, the kind of professional calm that came from having handled situations that were actually worse than the one being described and knowing the difference. Mara gave her the full picture in 8 minutes: the original incident, the tournament, the investigation, and the administrative call from Hargrove Regional. Adler listened without interrupting, asked 2 specific questions at the end: the name of the person who'd called and whether Mara had signed any documentation at the hospital related to public representation or media conduct, and then said, "Don't go into that meeting alone. I'll be there." "Can you clear your morning?" "I'm already clearing it." A pause. "What you're describing is a retaliatory contact, someone under active criminal investigation reaching into your employer's administrative process to create professional consequences for you. That's not a gray area." Her voice had an edge to it that was not theatrical. "I'll meet you at the hospital entrance at 8:45. Mara thanked her and ended the call. Drank her coffee. It had gone slightly cold. She drank it anyway. What? Simone Adler was 52, medium height, with close-cropped silver hair and the kind of physical stillness that made rooms feel differently organized once she was in them. She arrived at the hospital entrance at 8:43 with a leather document case and shook Mara's hand once, firmly, without preamble. "Tell me one more thing before we go in," she said as they walked toward the administrative wing. "The anonymous message last night, the one about the channel being deleted. You believe it was Cole Varro?" "Yes." "Did you respond?" "No." Adler nodded. "Good." The administrative conference room was on the 4th floor, a space Mara had been in exactly once before, for a committee review of a procedural incident 2 years ago that had been resolved without consequence. It was the kind of room designed to feel neutral, but functioned as an assertion of institutional authority. A long table, chairs that were slightly too formal. A window that looked out at the hospital's parking structure rather than anything that might make you feel like a person rather than a file. 3 people were already seated. The administrator who'd called, a man named Gresham, 50s, careful posture, a tablet in front of him, and 2 others Mara didn't recognize, one of whom had a folder and the other of whom had the specific expression of someone from the legal department who was there to observe rather than initiate. Gresham looked at Adler. "We weren't aware you'd be bringing representation." "She's not required to notify you in advance," Adler said pleasantly, sitting down. "Shall we begin?" Mara sat. She folded her hands on the table and looked at Gresham with the same expression she used for difficult clinical conversations: present, attentive, giving nothing unnecessary. Gresham cleared his throat. "We received a communication 2 days ago from a legal representative identifying themselves as acting on behalf of Caden Vero. The communication expressed concern about Ms. Solis's recent public activities, specifically the tournament participation, and suggested that her conduct had created reputational exposure for this institution." He spoke carefully, the way people spoke when they'd rehearsed something and were staying inside the rehearsed version. "The communication requested that the hospital review." Whether Ms. Solis's behavior outside the institution was consistent with the standards of conduct required of clinical staff. The room was quiet. "I'd like a copy of that communication," Adler said. "That can be—" "Now please, before we continue." She said it without raising her voice. The hospital's legal observer opened the folder and passed a document across the table. Adler read it without reaction, then placed it in front of Mara. Mara read it. It was 3 paragraphs. The language was precise and carefully positioned. It didn't accuse her of anything directly, which was a specific legal choice. It suggested, in the way that things can be suggested without being stated, that a nurse who had participated in a public combat sports event that was now subject to a police investigation might represent a liability concern for the institution that employed her. It referenced her profile in the Delmore Independent and described the military background disclosure as a potential issue with her original employment representations, which was not only wrong but specifically wrong in a way that required deliberate misreading of her hiring documentation. She set it down. "This document mischaracterizes my employment application," she said directly to Gresham. "My training background was not asked about in the application process, and was therefore not represented or misrepresented in any form. I'd suggest reviewing the original documentation before accepting that framing." Gresham looked at the legal observer. Something passed between them. "The hospital's position," Adler said, her voice still pleasant but with a structural quality underneath it. "Now, will need to be considered very carefully. What you have in front of you is a communication from an individual who is currently under active criminal investigation for illegal surveillance conducted at a licensed athletic event where my client was a registered participant. The suggestion that my client's lawful participation in that event, and the truth that emerged from it, represents a professional liability, is not only without merit, it is, depending on how the hospital chooses to respond to this communication, potentially actionable in itself." She let that settle for exactly 2 seconds. "My client has an exemplary performance record at this institution. She has not been the subject of any clinical complaint, patient concern, or professional conduct review in 3 years of employment. She is, based on the documentation I reviewed this morning, currently recommended for a senior charge rotation." She looked at Gresham. "I'd like to understand what the hospital actually intends to do with this communication, rather than continuing to discuss what it contains." Gresham was quiet for a moment, the particular quiet of someone who had entered a meeting with one expectation and was recalibrating against a different reality. "The hospital's position," he said finally, "is that this communication was received and required acknowledgement. We are not taking any action against Miss Solis's employment or standing." He looked at Mara. "I want to be clear about that." "Then why did you call her in?" Adler asked. Another pause. To Gresham's credit, he didn't reach for a comfortable deflection. "Because we needed to understand the situation directly from her before making that determination. And now we have." He closed the tablet. "That's the extent of this meeting." Mara looked at him for a moment. "I'd like the hospital to formally document that no action was taken, and the grounds for the request were found to be without merit," she said. "In writing, to my personnel file." Gresham looked at the legal observer again. The legal observer nodded once. "That can be arranged," Gresham said. They left 11 minutes after they'd arrived. In the corridor outside the administrative wing, Adler stopped walking and looked at Mara with something that wasn't quite a smile but was adjacent to it. "You've done something like that before," she said. "Sat in a room with people who had institutional authority and said what needed to be said without flinching." "Different rooms," Mara said. "Same principle." Adler handed her a card. "If anything else comes through that channel, call me the same day. Don't wait." She paused. "I don't think it will." What he sent was a pressure tactic from someone who was already losing and knew it. The investigation has its own momentum now, and his legal team is going to be focused on that, not on manufacturing administrative complaints against people who beat him on the mat. She picked up her document case. "You're going to be fine." "I know," Mara said. Adler looked at her for a beat, the way people sometimes looked at her when they expected uncertainty and found something else instead. Then she nodded and walked toward the elevator. Mara stood in the corridor for a moment, then turned and went to start her shift. The charges were filed 19 days later. Renata Flynn broke the story at 6 in the morning, and Mara read the article on her phone during a 12-minute break between patient assessments. not because she'd been waiting for it, but because Danny had texted her a link, and she read it the way she read all relevant information, once, completely, without rushing. Caden Varro had been charged with criminal invasion of privacy and conspiracy to commit unlawful surveillance, stemming from the covert cameras found at Iron Peak on tournament day. A second charge related to the attempted HVAC sabotage was listed as pending, contingent on establishing the connection between the planning messages and his direct authorization. The content assistant who'd been taken into custody at the event had entered a cooperation agreement and had provided a documented record of instructions received from Caden through the channel's private management system. The VeroForce channel had been deleted 4 days after the tournament, confirming what the anonymous message had told her. The deletion didn't erase the legal record. Platforms maintain data for active investigations. But it removed the public-facing architecture of 2 million followers, years of content, and the entire infrastructure of a brand that had been built on a specific and now thoroughly dismantled narrative. She put the phone away, went back to work. Petra found her at the workstation an hour later, wearing the expression of someone who had too much information and the restraint to ask just one question. "Did you see the news?" "Yes." "And?" Mara finished the chart note she was writing. "And I have 3 patients who need assessments." Petra was quiet for a second. "You're really not going to do the satisfying thing and say something quotable, are you?" "This is the satisfying thing," Mara said. "This." She gestured at the workstation, the bay, the ordinary functioning hospital around them. "This is what I was doing before, and it's what I'm doing now. Nothing about any of it should have changed that." Petra looked at her for a long moment. "You know what Dr. Ellison said about you last week, in the team meeting?" Mara looked up. She said, and I'm quoting exactly, "Solace is the best trauma nurse on this floor, and possibly this hospital, and the fact that she's also apparently capable of submitting black belts is either irrelevant to that or explains a great deal about it, and either way I don't care because she shows up and she does the work." Petra delivered it with precise fidelity. Then she moved on to the supply chain agenda item. Something moved through Mara's chest that was not quite any single emotion but had warmth in it. She looked back at her screen. "She's not wrong about the supply chain issue." "Mara." "What?" "Take the compliment." She exhaled. "Thank you for telling me." Petra nodded and walked away, satisfied. The youth training session at Iron Peak was on a Saturday morning in the 3rd week of the following month. Donahue had 8 kids signed up from the after-school program, ages 9 through 14, all of them from the lower-income neighborhood the charity tournament had been supporting. He had 2 other instructors confirmed. He'd asked Mara for 2 hours of her morning, and she'd agreed and then quietly rearranged her entire weekend schedule to make sure she arrived rested and on time. She was there at 8, 30 minutes before the kids arrived. Donahue showed her the curriculum framework he'd put together: basic movement, falling safely, boundary-setting drills, the foundational physical vocabulary that preceded any actual technique. She read it, suggested 2 modifications, and he took both without debate. The kids arrived in a group, escorted by a program coordinator named Marcus, who had the particular organized energy of someone who genuinely liked his job and was good at it. They ranged from small and serious to lanky and loud, and they all looked at the gym with the eyes of people entering a space that was new and more interesting than they'd expected. One of the girls, 11, maybe 12, with a narrow, watchful face and the posture of someone who'd learned to take up less space than she needed, looked directly at Mara for a long moment without speaking. "You're the nurse," she said finally. "From the video." "Yes," Mara said. "You won." "I did." The girl thought about this with visible seriousness. "Why didn't you do anything the first time, when he kicked your bag?" Mara crouched slightly so they were at the same level. The question was the best one anyone had asked her about any of this, and it deserved an honest answer. "Because the first time wasn't the right place," she said. "It wasn't safe, it wasn't fair, and it was designed to make me react in a way that would have looked bad regardless of what I did. The right move was to wait for a situation where the terms were fair." The girl considered this. "That's hard." "Yes," Mara said. "It's probably the hardest part, knowing the difference between backing down and waiting for the right moment. They can look exactly the same from the outside." The girl nodded slowly, like she was filing it somewhere she'd keep it. Then she walked past Mara onto the mat to join the other kids. Mara straightened, Donahue was standing a few feet away, and he'd heard it, and he said nothing, which was the correct response. The session ran 2 hours. It was not orderly. The 9-year-old boy in the corner fell over his own feet twice and laughed both times. One of the older kids was skeptical of everything for the first 40 minutes, and then, around the midpoint, got interested in a movement drill and stopped performing skepticism. The quiet girl with the watchful face turned out to have a natural instinct for reading balance and weight distribution that made Mara stop the group twice just to have everyone watch what she'd figured out. At the end, Marcus lined them up for a group photo in front of the gym's logo wall. Donahue stood at one end. The 2 other instructors stood at the other. Mara started moving toward the exit. "Solis," Donahue said. She turned. He gestured at the line. Just that. A single gesture, no additional instruction. She walked over and stood in the photo. The Delmore Independent ran a follow-up piece 6 weeks after the charges were filed. Renata Flynn had been tracking the legal process and the broader fallout with the same careful attention as her earlier work. Mara read it when it published because Renata had asked if she wanted advance access to verify factual accuracy, which she'd declined. The facts were the facts, and Renata had demonstrated she could find them without help. But she read the published version with genuine attention. The piece covered the investigation's status, both charges proceeding, the cooperation agreement with the content assistant providing a documentary record that the DA's office had described as substantial. It covered the collapse of the VeroForce brand in specific terms, the channel's deletion, the departure of sponsors, the formal complaint investigation by the Gym Association that had resulted in a permanent membership suspension from the Iron Peak facility and a recommendation of the same to affiliated gyms across the regional network. It covered the pattern that had emerged from other individuals who'd been targeted by the channel's humiliation content. 3 of them had now spoken publicly, and their accounts were consistent in ways that supported the pattern the association complaint files had documented. Caden Vero had not spoken publicly since the tournament. His legal representation had released a single statement describing the charges as being contested and the situation as complex. Cole Vero had given one brief interview to a smaller sports outlet, not VeroForce, not anything branded, in which he'd said he was returning to competitive martial arts independently, that he took responsibility for his role in a collaboration that had caused harm, and that he had no further comment on the legal proceedings involving his brother. It was short, and it didn't oversell itself, and Mara found those qualities accurate to what she knew of him. Near the end of the article, Renata had included a section on the youth program and the Iron Peak training sessions, framing them as the practical outcome of the tournament charity proceeds. There was a quote from Marcus, the program coordinator, about what the sessions had meant for the kids. There was a quote from Donahue about the gym's direction going forward. There was no quote from Mara. She told Renata she didn't have one to give, and Renata, who was good at her job, had understood that this was itself information and had left the space clean. She closed the article and set her phone down on the kitchen table, the same table with the scratch near the corner. The apartment was quiet in the early evening way she'd learned to appreciate rather than resist. Outside, the street below was doing its ordinary thing, a dog walker, a woman with grocery bags, a teenager on a bicycle. She thought about the girl from the training session, the watchful, serious face. That's hard. And Mara's honest answer? Yes, it's probably the hardest part. She'd meant it when she said it, and she still meant it now, sitting with the full picture of the past 2 months laid out in her memory, with the clarity that comes when a thing has actually finished rather than just paused. The hardest part had not been the tournament, or the match, or the legal aftermath. It hadn't been the administrative meeting, or the covert cameras, or the 4 million people who'd had a fixed and wrong opinion of her for several weeks. The hardest part had been the first morning. The video with 47 seconds of her on the floor picking up her things, and the decision to finish her toast and not to react, not because she had no response available, but because she understood that the available response, in that moment, in that context, would have served his story and not the truth. The patience required to hold what she knew about herself steady against what a stranger was publicly claiming about her. That patience, maintained over weeks, through exhaustion and professional pressure and the accumulated weight of being misrepresented to millions of people. That was the discipline. Not the submission at 3 minutes 40 seconds, the weeks before it. She'd spent 4 years learning to operate in conditions designed against her. What that training actually produced wasn't the ability to fight. It was the capacity to remain herself under pressure, to know what she was, hold it clearly, and act from that knowledge rather than from the noise around it. The noise had been considerable. She'd remained herself. That was the thing worth keeping. Everything else, the tournament result, the charges, the administrative letter in her personnel file, even the quiet satisfaction of the girl on the mat figuring out how weight distribution worked, all of it was downstream of that. She got up from the table, made dinner, something real, something that took 20 minutes and required attention, because she'd spent too many weeks eating things that were fast and convenient, and her body had an opinion about that. She ate at the table. She did not watch anything while she ate. She just sat with the food in the evening and the ordinary continuing fact of her own life, which was not dramatic and was not clean and was exactly what she'd chosen and rebuilt, and refused to surrender when someone tried to take it from her. Her phone buzzed once. She glanced at it. Danny. New intake for the self-defense workshop. She's a nurse. Trauma. Works overnight shifts and has about 45 minutes on Tuesday mornings. You free to help me assess her baseline? She looked at the message. Thought about Tuesday. She had a shift ending at 7, which left the morning window. She typed back, I'll be there. She put the phone down, finished her dinner, washed the dishes with the methodical care she applied to tasks that deserved to be done properly. Dried her hands. She had a shift in the morning and patients who needed her full attention and a Tuesday to plan for and a right side that was finally, after 5 weeks, no longer reminding her of anything. She had a gym with a back room and a schedule she was rebuilding around what she actually wanted from it. She had a personnel file with a formal notation that a baseless complaint had been received and found without merit, which was a bureaucratic sentence that somehow managed to be exactly as satisfying as it sounded. She had a life that she had built carefully and defended without apology and returned to intact. The people who underestimate the quiet ones are always operating on the same false assumption, that restraint is the absence of capability, that patience is the same thing as weakness, that a person who doesn't announce themselves has nothing to announce. They look at someone who chooses stillness and read it as limitation because in their experience, people who are capable of more always make sure you know it. They never consider the other possibility, that the most powerful thing in the room is the person who knows exactly what they could do and chooses, every single day, not to do it until the moment it genuinely matters. Mara Solis turned off the kitchen light and went to get ready for bed. Tomorrow was a long shift. She wanted to sleep well. She did.